Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. Rock Hudson wasn't just Hollywood's leading man, he was the embodiment of post-war masculinity. When the public saw him, they saw rugged romance, the kind of man every woman dreamed of. But behind the square jaw and broad shoulders was a man living in fear. In 1955, whispers about Hudson's sexuality threatened to destroy everything. Confidential magazine was preparing to out him. The studio panicked. His agent Henry Wilson orchestrated a desperate solution. Hudson would marry Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. To the world, it was love. To those inside the industry, it was damage control. The wedding was staged with cold precision, press releases, photo ops, and carefully chosen honeymoon locations. Hudson and Gates barely knew each other. Gates later confessed she had no idea she was being used as a shield. Hudson, meanwhile, felt imprisoned in a script that had no end. The marriage lasted just 3 years, ending quietly once the threat passed. The emotional wreckage lingered. Phyllis wrote in her memoir, "I was cast in a role I didn't audition for." Hudson later admitted it was one of the darkest chapters in his life, forced to live a lie while the world adored a fiction. He died in 1985, still haunted by the life he never got to live openly. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. Barbara Stanwyck was tough, independent, and fiercely private. Robert Taylor was MGM's golden boy, handsome, clean-cut, and marketable. Their 1939 wedding was described as a union of Hollywood royalty. But behind the scenes, it was all business. The marriage wasn't born out of passion, but out of necessity. Stanwyck faced persistent rumors about her romantic friendships with women. Taylor's bachelor lifestyle and occasional affairs with men alarmed MGM. Studio heads saw the solution clearly: pair them off and silence the speculation. They agreed to the arrangement, with MGM even writing clauses into contracts ensuring regular joint appearances and staged domestic scenes. The couple maintained separate lives and homes, but for cameras, they played the part well. Breakfast photos were staged on sound stages. Magazine interviews were scripted. They divorced in 1951 after 12 successful years of pretending. Stanwyck never remarried. Taylor later married Ursula Thies, but their fake marriage became the gold standard of studio-engineered relationships. As one MGM executive said, they didn't fool each other. They fooled everyone else. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. Judy Garland, America's sweetheart, was fragile, brilliant but broken. MGM kept her drugged, working, and compliant. Vincente Minnelli was a visionary director with a quiet demeanor and private relationships with men. In 1945, the studio saw an opportunity. Marry the two, and you solve multiple problems. Garland's instability could be masked by the illusion of domestic bliss. Minnelli's sexuality could be concealed under the guise of a traditional family. The wedding was a photo opportunity, not a celebration. Judy was so sick from withdrawal she could barely stand. Minnelli looked more like a prisoner than a groom. They had one daughter, Liza, who brought them a sliver of genuine connection. But the marriage, held together by pills and appearances, couldn't last. Judy spiraled deeper into addiction. Minnelli sought refuge elsewhere. Their 1951 divorce ended a studio experiment in illusion. Theirs was a tragic performance, not on screen, but in life. As one crew member whispered, it wasn't love, it was PR with a side of pills. Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero was the epitome of Latin charm in Hollywood, elegant, flirtatious, and always the bachelor in public. But while his contemporaries were forced into real lavender marriages, the studio opted for a more surreal deception. They invented wives. Romero never married, but over the years, Fox publicists crafted stories of multiple marriages and quiet divorces. Elena, Carmela, and Luisa became part of the narrative. Fictional women he was said to have loved and lost. There were no real weddings, only photoshopped press images and false memories shared in interviews Romero was briefed on. Behind the charm, Romero lived a double life, memorizing details of marriages he never had and women he never met. He privately dated men and lived carefully within the boundaries set by Hollywood's moral code. He once joked to a friend, "I've had more imaginary wives than Errol Flynn had real ones." It was tragic humor masking the truth, that a man so full of life had to spend his career pretending he was someone else entirely. Katherine Heepburn and Spencer Tracy. To the public, theirs was a tragic, enduring love. Katherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, locked in an epic 26-year affair, the kind that survived unrequited devotion and religious barriers. But behind the myth was one of the studio system's most brilliant illusions, crafted not to reveal love, but to bury two complicated truths. Hepburn was fiercely independent and quietly involved in long-term relationships with women, most notably with socialite Laura Harding. Tracy, on the other hand, battled alcoholism and reportedly had relationships with both women and men, some of which were managed by MGM with disturbing discretion. Yet the studio couldn't allow these personal truths to become public. So MGM turned them into a narrative. After their first film together in 1942, Woman of the Year, publicists orchestrated a romance for the ages. Gossip columnists were fed a drip feed of intimate but sanitized details, secret trysts, undying affection, and the great obstacle, Tracy's Catholicism, preventing him from divorcing his wife. It was the perfect excuse. They rarely appeared together in public. When Tracy passed in 1967, Hepburn didn't attend the funeral, citing respect for his wife. The truth? She had spent the last years of his life in proximity, not partnership. In a private letter, Hepburn admitted, "The studio has decided Tracy and I are madly in love. It would be funny if it weren't so effective." This wasn't romance. It was reputation maintenance by the masters of fiction. Janet Gaynor and Adrien. Janet Gaynor was Hollywood's first Best Actress Oscar winner, delicate, wholesome, and adored by audiences. Adrien, MGM's legendary costume designer, was flamboyant, visionary, and quietly gay. When they married in 1939, it appeared to be a match of beauty and artistry. In reality, it was a lavender marriage, carefully crafted to protect both their careers. By the late 1930s, both faced increased scrutiny. Gaynor had close relationships with women, especially actress Mary Martin. Adrien, meanwhile, operated within Hollywood's gay elite, but any public confirmation could destroy him. Studio heads feared that whispers around either would become headlines, so they proposed a union that solved both problems. The wedding was tasteful, elegant, and heavily publicized. It worked. Gossip cooled, careers flourished. They even had a son, further cementing the illusion. But behind closed doors, they led mostly separate lives, each pursuing private truths shielded from public intrusion. They stayed married until Adrien's death in 1959. Despite the arrangement, theirs was not devoid of affection. Friends noted a genuine friendship, mutual protection, and shared understanding. But it was not a love story. It was survival under the glittering tyranny of the studio system. William Haynes and the marriage he refused. William Haynes had it all: charisma, comic timing, box office hits, and an authentic love in his life. Jimmy Shields, his partner since 1926. But MGM wanted something else. After Haynes was arrested in a homosexual scandal in 1933, studio head Louis B. Mayer delivered an ultimatum: enter a studio-arranged marriage or be blacklisted. Haynes didn't flinch. "I won't fake a marriage. Fire me," he said. Mayer did exactly that. Haynes's name was stripped from marquees. He was dropped from all productions. His career vanished overnight. But instead of crumbling, Haynes thrived. He pivoted to interior design with Jimmy, building a business that attracted stars, moguls, and ironically, even the same studio heads who had exiled him. The couple remained together for 47 years, unbothered by Hollywood's expectations and living one of the longest, most loving partnerships of the Golden Age. Joan Crawford, one of his closest friends, said it best: "Billy was the only one of us who had the courage to tell the studio to go to hell, and he lived happily ever after." Raymond Burr and his imaginary wife. Raymond Burr, the brooding star of Perry Mason and Ironside, crafted a tragic personal mythology for the press. His wife, Annette Sutherland, died in a plane crash. His son, Michael, succumbed to leukemia. Fans mourned these losses alongside him, but none of it was true. Annette never existed. Neither did Michael. Burr's entire backstory was a fiction, designed to shield a secret life that Hollywood wouldn't accept. Burr was gay. His long-term partner, Robert Benavides, was a silent presence in his life. Studio heads feared that the revelation of Burr's sexuality would destroy his appeal. So they approved a backstory more palatable to the public. Tragedy, not truth. Over time, Burr internalized the fiction so deeply that he recited it in interviews with conviction. Reporters never questioned it. When the truth finally surfaced years after his death, fans were stunned, but not angry. Instead, they grieved for a man who had to live a life of loss that wasn't real, just to hide a love that was. Tyrone Power and Annabella. Tyrone Power was 20th Century Fox's golden boy, the swashbuckling heartthrob whose piercing eyes and smooth voice melted audiences. But behind his iconic smile was a man wrestling with a deeply hidden truth. Rumors of Power's bisexuality swirled within Hollywood's inner circles. Studio heads, fearing a potential scandal, decided to contain it, not with a PR campaign, but with a marriage. In 1939, Power was matched with French actress Annabella. She was elegant, exotic, and recently divorced, perfect for the illusion. Darryl F. Zanuck, head of 20th Century Fox, pushed hard for the union. Annabella was hesitant. Power was conflicted, but contracts and careers were on the line. The marriage went forward with studio support, wedding bells, and endless photo spreads. They were rarely seen alone in real life, but always together in fan magazines. When Power was deployed during World War II, the studio used his absence to cover the lack of public intimacy. In truth, the marriage had quietly disintegrated behind closed doors. Annabella later confessed that she had been warned not to expect a conventional relationship. "He had his own way of living," she once said cryptically. Their divorce in 1948 was painted as amicable, but it marked the end of an emotional masquerade that left both emotionally bruised. For Power, the pressure never relented. He married again, twice, but whispers never stopped. He died at age 44 of a heart attack, a man adored by millions but privately divided. His first marriage stands as a haunting reminder of how Hollywood forced even its brightest stars to perform off-screen roles that cost them their peace. Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis. They were the picture-perfect couple of the 1950s. Janet Leigh, the sweet-faced star of Psycho, and Tony Curtis, the charming, fast-talking bad boy of Some Like It Hot. Their 1951 wedding was a media frenzy. MGM celebrated the union as the merging of two box office dynamos. But beneath the golden exterior, the marriage was as strategic as it was romantic. Insiders have long whispered that the union wasn't born from passion, but rather pressure. Both had careers to protect. Curtis faced scrutiny over rumors of his personal life, and Leigh, under contract, needed to reinforce her image as America's ideal wife. Studios pushed them together, banked on their public chemistry, and milked their appearances for every inch of publicity. Leigh later hinted that she didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to. "We were young and swept up in something bigger than us," she said in a retrospective interview. Their home life, heavily photographed, was curated by publicists. Their children became part of the show. But Curtis, unable to live within the confines of a fabricated dream, spiraled into affairs and substance abuse. Leigh, trying to maintain the illusion, buried herself in work. By the time they divorced in 1962, both were emotionally exhausted and publicly unraveling. Curtis admitted later that the marriage had been more about cameras than connection. "We were never alone. Not really, not once." Their story is a cautionary tale of two people trapped by an image too perfect to be real and destroyed by the pressure to keep pretending. Dorothy Dandridge and Harold Nicholas. Dorothy Dandridge was more than a trailblazer. She was the first African-American woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, a symbol of progress in a deeply racist industry. But even she wasn't immune to the studio system's manipulations. When whispers about her interracial relationships began to circulate, the industry panicked. The solution? Pair her with another black entertainer, Harold Nicholas of the famed Nicholas Brothers. The 1942 marriage was hailed as historic, two black stars defying odds together. In reality, it was a containment strategy. Studio executives believed that pairing Dandridge with a black husband would silence controversy and preserve her marketability. Dandridge agreed reluctantly. She admired Nicholas's talent, but their connection was never romantic. Soon after marriage, the cracks emerged. Nicholas was often absent, and Dandridge felt trapped. Her dreams of love were replaced with nights of isolation and raising their disabled daughter alone, while Harold toured abroad. Behind closed doors, Dandridge endured heartbreak, betrayal, and loneliness. Studios paraded her image as a happily married mother, while she silently suffered. After their divorce in 1951, Dandridge tried to reclaim her personal truth, but damage had been done. The fake marriage robbed her of time, energy, and emotional freedom she could never regain. Anthony Perkins and Barry Baronson. Anthony Perkins will forever be known as Norman Bates, the man who brought psychological horror to life in Psycho. But off-screen, Perkins led a life filled with fear, secrecy, and heartbreak. In an era that punished queerness, Perkins had relationships with men including Tab Hunter and composer Stephen Sondheim. Loves he was never allowed to acknowledge publicly. By the early 1970s, with his career at a critical point and age catching up, Perkins was advised to settle down. Publicly, he met Barry Baronson, a model and aspiring actress. They married in 1973 in a quiet ceremony orchestrated by Hollywood handlers. Though they shared affection, many close to Perkins believed the union was designed more for optics than intimacy. Perkins remained emotionally divided for the rest of his life. His friends knew the truth. His family played along. He lived in fear of scandal, even as society slowly changed. Barry loved him deeply and stood by him through his AIDS diagnosis. Perkins died in 1992, still cloaked in the secrecy he had worn like armor. Barry tragically was aboard American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11th and died in the Twin Towers attack. Their story, full of love, illusion, and quiet sorrow, reflects how deeply the studio system could shape and limit even the most iconic lives. Tab Hunter and the arranged girlfriends that never existed. Tab Hunter was the all-American boy. Blonde hair, square jaw, piercing blue eyes, the poster child for 1950s masculinity. Warner Brothers built him up as a heartthrob and sold him like a dream. But Tab had a secret the studio couldn't allow to surface. He was gay. Studio executives feared that any whiff of homosexuality would destroy his carefully polished image and sink their golden investment. So they created a string of fake relationships. Tab was linked to starlets like Natalie Wood, Debbie Reynolds, and Achika Shiro. Gossip columnists were fed photo ops, romantic boat rides, and date nights, none of which were real. The most infamous publicity stunt involved Hunter and Natalie Wood. They were photographed kissing, attending premieres, and spending time alone. In reality, Wood was in on the ruse. She was also a victim of the system and played along to protect her own image. Behind the scenes, Hunter was in love with figure skater Ronnie Robertson and later actor Anthony Perkins. The lies weighed heavily. Hunter wrote in his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, "Living that kind of double life, always looking over your shoulder, it's exhausting. You start to forget who you really are." He eventually came out decades later, but only after his career had long cooled. Warner Brothers never arranged a fake marriage, but their constant pairing of Tab with female co-stars was their form of control, turning every personal interaction into a lie. Hunter may not have worn a wedding ring for the cameras, but he wore a mask, one so heavy it took him a lifetime to remove. Sal Mano and the studio's silent arrangement. Sal Mano's breakout performance in Rebel Without a Cause made him one of the most promising young stars of the 1950s. Sensitive, expressive, and emotionally raw, Mano captured something uniquely human. But Hollywood saw a problem. He was also visibly effeminate and unapologetically queer in private. By the late 50s, rumors swirled. To combat them, Mano's publicists fabricated a relationship with actress Jill Haworth. She was beautiful, British, and under contract, perfect for appearances. The two were spotted on red carpets and interviewed about their supposed plans to marry. They even lived together for a brief period, giving reporters plenty to write about. In truth, Mano confided in Haworth that he was gay and needed her help. She agreed, more friend than lover. "I was his beard," she said bluntly in later interviews. He was terrified of being found out. Mineo wanted love, but Hollywood only offered masks. After the fake romance faded, Mineo's career suffered. He was blacklisted from major roles. He directed and took theater gigs but never regained his former stature. He was murdered in 1976 in a robbery gone wrong, alone, having spent years hiding his truth. His story is less about a staged marriage and more about the tragic vacuum of opportunity that forced stars like him to live in shame. The illusion wasn't just about who he loved, it was about being allowed to exist at all. Raoul Novaro and the forced silence of a leading man. Long before Clark Gable or Errol Flynn, Raoul Novaro was Hollywood's ultimate Latin lover. In the silent film era, he was a sensation, particularly after his turn in Ben-Hur. Studios paraded him as a suave ladies' man with endless romantic entanglements. But Novaro was gay and never wanted to pretend otherwise. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's publicity machine worked overtime to suppress this truth. They never arranged a legal marriage, but they created an endless string of fictional romances. Press releases gushed about flings with starlets like Greta Garbo and Myrna Loy, women who were either close friends or had never even met him. Studio executives forbade him from appearing in public with his male companions. At one point, they suggested he enter a sham marriage to cement his image. Novaro refused. He lived privately but authentically, though the cost was steep. As sound took over and his reluctance to play along became more visible, roles dried up. He faded into relative obscurity, making occasional appearances in minor films. His later life was marked by solitude and quiet dignity. Tragically, Novaro was murdered in 1968 by two brothers who believed he was hiding money in his home, a crime driven by greed and fueled by the isolation fame had left behind. He once said, "They loved me for a fantasy, but they never knew who I was." His life was not only overshadowed by the roles he played, but by the one he was never allowed to live openly. Clifton Webb in the eternal bachelor role. Clifton Webb played some of Hollywood's most iconic upper-crust gentlemen. Witty, dapper, and acerbic, he was typecast as the elite bachelor in films like Laura and The Razor's Edge. But Webb wasn't just playing a part on screen, he was forced to live it off-screen too. A lifelong bachelor, Webb was known to be gay among Hollywood insiders. He never entered a real or fake marriage, but that didn't stop the studios from weaving stories about his romantic interests. In interviews, he'd casually mention lady friends and potential engagements, all studio-crafted distractions. Publicists paired him with society women and co-stars for red carpet appearances. The subtext was clear: keep the mystery alive, but never confirm the truth. Webb's close relationship with his mother, whom he lived with for most of his life, was often mocked, but it also helped shield him from more invasive questions. He played along. He had no choice. The studio system wouldn't have allowed him to succeed otherwise. He once joked, "I'm not married, not because I haven't found the right woman. It's because the studio hasn't written her part yet." Webb never came out publicly and died in 1966, surrounded by friends but never fully seen. His carefully preserved image of elegance and restraint was a Hollywood invention, crafted to protect a truth that America wasn't yet willing to accept. Richard Chamberlain in his Decades in Disguise. Richard Chamberlain rose to stardom as Dr. Kildare, the handsome and noble physician who stole hearts across America. His boyish charm and romantic roles solidified him as the ideal man. But it was all a performance. Chamberlain was gay, and for decades, no one could know. In the 1960s and 70s, his star power grew with roles in The Thornbirds and Shogun. But with that fame came pressure from studios and publicists. A straight romantic lead couldn't be gay, not in Hollywood's rulebook, so they invented a romantic history for him. He was linked to multiple women, always described as fiercely private, and always just out of a relationship with a beautiful starlet. Though never pushed into a legal marriage, Chamberlain was instructed to hide his true partner, Martin Rabbit, from public view. Rabbit, a writer and producer, was his real-life love for over 3 decades, yet their partnership had to be erased. Studio handlers suggested Chamberlain keep a female companion on hand during events, just in case photographers asked questions. For years, Chamberlain lived this double life. He avoided interviews, refused to discuss his personal life, and maintained the illusion to protect his career. When he finally came out publicly in 2003, he was in his 70s. The relief was bittersweet. "I had to hide, pretend, deny for so long," he said. "It was exhausting and unnecessary." His story is less about a fake marriage and more about a system that demanded emotional erasure to maintain a lie. Hollywood didn't just deny him love, it denied him the right to exist fully. Greta Garbo and the engagement that never was. Greta Garbo was the queen of mystery. With her haunting eyes and quiet elegance, she captivated audiences and refused to play by anyone's rules. But even Garbo, elusive as she was, couldn't escape Hollywood's attempts to construct a romantic narrative around her. The studio's biggest fabrication was her alleged engagement to actor John Gilbert. In the 1920s, MGM promoted the romance heavily. The pair had undeniable on-screen chemistry, and Louis B. Mayer saw dollar signs in a wedding. Garbo was hesitant. Mayer grew impatient. Finally, a wedding date was announced, but Garbo never showed. She left Gilbert at the altar, quite literally. The press blamed her reclusiveness. The truth was more complex. Garbo's closest relationships were with women, including actress Mimi Pollock and writer Mercedes D'Acosta. But none of those stories made it into fan magazines. Instead, MGM continued to float tales of mysterious boyfriends and lost engagements. Garbo played along just enough to keep the wolves at bay. "I want to be alone," she famously said. But what she meant was, "I want to be free." Garbo never married. She died in 1990, her legacy intact, but her truth known only to a few. Her engagement to Gilbert remains one of Hollywood's earliest and most enduring examples of a fake romance crafted for press and weaponized to mask a woman's defiant independence. Montgomery Clift and the lover, erased by history. Montgomery Clift had everything: talent, sensitivity, and heartbreaking beauty. He was the anti-Brando, vulnerable, aching, and real. But what fans didn't know was that he was also a man in love, with other men, and Hollywood was never going to let that truth out. In the 1940s and 50s, Clift was under constant scrutiny. Paramount executives demanded he clean up his image. Rumors of relationships with actors like Jack Larson and choreographer Jerome Robbins were too dangerous. The solution? A fake engagement to actress Libby Holman, decades his senior and known for her own controversial past. The pairing made no sense, but that didn't matter. Publicists pushed the story hard. Paparazzi caught photos. Tabloids speculated about wedding dates. Meanwhile, Clift continued living in fear, his real relationships hidden behind security guards and code names. After a horrific car crash in 1956, Clift's pain intensified, not just physical, but emotional. He spiraled into addiction, self-hate, and isolation. He refused to deny his truth privately, but publicly, he said nothing. He died at 45, never married, his heart heavy with secrets. The fake engagement with Holman became Hollywood's way of keeping the lie alive while suffocating the man behind it. A man who could have redefined masculinity, if only he'd been allowed to live openly. George Nader and the cover marriage that never happened. George Nader was poised to become the next big thing in 1950s Hollywood. Handsome, athletic, and charismatic, he starred in films like Robot Monster and The Female Animal. Behind the scenes, however, his sexuality was an open secret in studio circles. He was in a committed relationship with Mark Miller, a writer and lifelong partner. But Universal Studios saw a problem. The studio feared that any exposure of Nader's private life would not only sink his rising career, but potentially endanger that of his close friend, Rock Hudson, who shared similar risks. So when whispers began to surface, publicists drew up plans for a staged romance, an orchestrated engagement between Nader and a Universal contract starlet. Though the marriage never legally materialized, tabloids printed rumors as fact. Photo shoots were arranged to show Nader and his supposed fiancée on dates, attending Hollywood galas, even house hunting. The actress, whose name was never publicly confirmed, was said to have agreed to the ruse for career visibility. Meanwhile, Nader continued to live with Miller, discreetly. The studio doubled down on the illusion. It's just a matter of time before George settles down. one press release claimed. But the pressures mounted. Eventually, rather than comply further, Nader stepped away from the spotlight. He relocated to Europe and focused on writing fiction, ironically often with openly gay characters. He and Mark Miller remained together for over 55 years, a quiet defiance of Hollywood's cruel restrictions. Nader's refusal to go through with a full Lavender marriage may have cost him stardom, but it won him a lifetime of authentic love, a rare victory in a town built on illusions. Marlene Dietrich and her PR husband invented love life. Marlene Dietrich was a walking contradiction, glamorous yet androgynous, sensual yet icy, adored yet feared. Her allure wasn't just cinematic, it was magnetic. But it came with complications. Openly bisexual among her inner circle, Dietrich maintained numerous relationships with women, including Edith Piaf and Mercedes D'Acosta. Hollywood, however, needed a more palatable image for American audiences, so the studios went to work crafting her heterosexual credibility. While she had one early real marriage, to Rudolf Sieber, it quickly became more of a convenient arrangement than a romantic bond. Sieber remained in Europe while Dietrich's career flourished in Hollywood. Despite being legally married, Dietrich was sold to the press as a single, heterosexual temptress involved in steamy flings with her leading men. At different points in her career, she was linked romantically to Gary Cooper, John Gilbert, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and even JFK. Some were based on fleeting encounters or complete fabrications by publicists. Dietrich played along when necessary. She'd give just enough of a quote to let the fantasy live, but never enough to confirm anything. Her daughter Maria Riva later revealed that many of these so-called affairs were entirely invented. The men were real. The relationships weren't, she wrote. Dietrich lived her private life with courage but carefully navigated the public lie. She famously said, "I do not regret anything," yet her carefully maintained mystique was also a defense mechanism, protecting her identity in an era that demanded conformity or exile. Her one true marriage remained intact on paper for decades, but in every meaningful way, Marlene Dietrich was alone, married to an image, faithful only to her craft, and silenced in love by the machine that made her a legend. Anna May Wong in the studio block marriages. Anna May Wong, the first Chinese-American movie star, broke barriers with her talent, beauty, and poise. But she also bore the burden of being constantly exoticized and censored, both on-screen and off. When she attempted to marry a white man in the 1930s, studio executives stepped in and blocked the union outright. Interracial marriage was illegal in many U.S. states at the time, and Hollywood had no interest in challenging societal norms. Instead, they fabricated romantic links between Wong and various Asian co-stars, suggesting culturally appropriate matches that reinforced stereotypes and protected their investments. Wong was quietly devastated. Her personal life was left in ruins, her freedom to love completely denied. She eventually abandoned the idea of marriage altogether, pouring herself into her work and later into activism. But even her professional path was sabotaged. She was passed over for leading roles that were given to white actresses in yellowface. Wong once said, "I can't marry, I can't love. I can only play at both." Her legacy is not just as a pioneering actress, but as a woman whose most intimate dreams were sacrificed on the altar of Hollywood respectability. Behind every dazzling smile and picture-perfect kiss of Golden Age Hollywood was a script written by fear, control, and profit. These 22 stars weren't just actors. They were prisoners of perception, forced to perform love stories that never existed. Their truth wasn't welcome, but now at last it's finally being heard.